Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to look at the Edexcel large dataset. So this dataset is all about real-life weather data provided by the Met Office, covering 5 stations in the UK. These are La Chaux, Leeming, Heathrow, Herne and Camborne, as well as 3 weather stations from overseas, Jacksonville, Perth and Beijing. And the data gathered is from as far back as 1987 up until 2015. And you'll need to be able to apply the content and the concepts you've learned throughout the stats course to analyze this large dataset. And this will include everything from calculating averages, interpreting graphs, and comparing datasets. The dataset includes various weather elements like daily mean temperature, total rainfall, sunshine hours, wind speed, and much more. So questions in your exam often focus on how the location of these weather stations affects the data. So for example, if we took La Chaux in Scotland versus Heathrow in the south of England, we can expect big differences in things like daily temperature ranges and total rainfall. So you'll be asked to think about how the geography impacts the data and to make observations about the mean and the range based on location. You'll also be asked how the data was collected, what sampling techniques were used, and you'll need to describe whether the data was collected using random sampling, systematic sampling, or something else, and then to think about whether the sample is representative. And don't forget about the difference between qualitative and quantitative data. Qualitative data could be something like a description of the weather, while quantitative data is more about measurable numbers like temperature or wind speed. So we're going to work through 4 exam-style questions based on a large dataset, and by the end of this you'll have a good understanding of how to tackle any dataset questions that come up in the exam. Okay, so let's look at question 1. Okay, so in our first example, we're told that a researcher wants to collect the average daily mean wind speed in the UK in 2015. He takes a sample consisting of a daily mean wind speed in Camborne and Heathrow for every day in July 2015. Explain why this sample may not be representative of a daily mean wind speed in the UK in July 2015. So if you want to try this question yourself, you should consider the location of Camborne and Heathrow when you're trying to find it out for the whole of the UK, the unique weather conditions that these 2 places might experience and why, and how this might be different from the weather conditions experienced in the other stations. You can pause the video, and when you come back, we'll discuss each of these points. Okay, so welcome back if you had a go. So to explain why the sample might not be representative, we'll begin with both locations are in the south of the United Kingdom and might not be representative of the entire country. Camborne is near the coast, which might experience higher wind speeds than inland locations, while Heathrow, as a major airport, may have weather patterns affected by urban and airport activity, and that other regions, particularly those further north or in different terrains, may have significantly different wind speeds. So in this question, it was about considering how the location of the 2 stations would affect the type of data collected, and how this data might be different to that collected in La Chaux, Leeming, or Herne. Okay, let's try another example. So in example 2, we're told that John takes a sample of a daily mean wind speed from January to March in 1987 in Leeming from a large data set, and this is here. Part A, what type of sample has John taken? Part B, suggest a reason why John has used this type of sampling rather than simple random sampling. And then for part C, suggest a method John could use to create a sampling frame. So in this question, think about the different types of sampling which would have led to this data. And then we need to remember that the large data set is a huge database which could make it more difficult for certain sampling techniques. So if you want to consider these points, you can pause the video, and when you come back, we'll discuss each of them in detail. Okay, so welcome back if you had a go. So for part A, the type of sample he's taken is opportunity sampling because the sample contains the first 10 dates in the dataset without random selection. You can see the 1st of January, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and so on. For part B, suggest a reason why he used this type of sampling. Well, it could be easier to carry out, especially when working with large datasets, as no random number generator is needed. And then for part C, suggest a method he could use to create a sampling frame. John could use simple random sampling by assigning each date a number and then using a random number generator to select the dates for his sample. So this question was about the different sampling techniques and when to use one over the other. Let's try a different example. So in example 3, we're told that a researcher looks at whether the daily mean wind speed in the UK is greater in 2015 than in 1987. He gathers 100 measurements in Camborne in 2015 and compares them with the measurements in Camborne at the same time of the year in 1987. For part A, suggest why any conclusions he draws might not be valid. And then for part B, suggest and explain a sampling method that he could use to get a better representation of a wind speed in the UK. So in this question, think about the two different time periods and how that might affect the data collected. You can pause the video, and when you come back, we'll discuss each of the points. Okay, so welcome back. So for part A, you can see the data has been drawn from a single location, which might not be representative of other regions across the United Kingdom, similar to what we discussed in example 1. Additionally, the methods used to measure wind speed in 1987 may not have been as accurate or reliable as those used in 2015, and this could potentially lead to biased comparisons. Part B suggests a sampling method that could be a better representation. Well, the researcher could use stratified sampling, selecting multiple locations across the UK with varying climates, coastal, inland, northern, or southern, and this would provide a more representative view of wind speeds across the country rather than focusing on one region. So in this question, we had to consider the technology available in the two different time periods to collect the data, and how this could potentially lead to bias. And then we had to suggest a way to overcome this. Okay, so let's try one more question. So finally, in example 4, we're told that Sarah decides to use stratified sampling to take a sample of 15 data points. She takes the first 6 values from Heathrow, and the first 6 points from Herne, and the first 3 points from Le Chars. What mistake has Sarah made, and how could she correct it? So when you think about this question, consider that she decides to use stratified sampling. You can pause the video, and when you come back, we'll go through the solution. Okay, so welcome back. So the mistake that Sarah's made is that the data has not been selected at random. By taking the first 6 values from Heathrow, the first 6 from Herne, and the first 3 from Le Chars, she's used opportunity sampling, which is a non-random method. Stratified sampling is a random method, which requires a sampling frame. How could she correct this? Well, to correct the mistake, Sarah should assign each data point a unique identifier, such as using the date, and then use a random number generator to select her sample from each location. Okay? Well, I hope that's given you an idea on the type of questions you could expect for a large data set. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and you can download the full lesson from my website, mrmathematics.com. I'll leave a link in the description below.